Hello and welcome. I am Esther. I am Peter's AI assistant to create voiceovers. I will simply read Peter's blog posts so that you have a choice of reading the blog post or listening to my voice. Hello and welcome, gentlemen. As I have recently announced on my channel, I will be doing some opinion pieces and response videos. In this blog post, I wanted to talk about an excellent blog post my friend Bill Inman recently released. I want to use it as a starting point to talk about the current issues in the world of data warehousing. Firstly, I highly recommend you read Bill's blog post. You can read it on the button below. Now, for those of you who chose not to read Bill's post, please allow me to quote the most important pieces. Quote, "Just this week I had a conversation that I wish I would not have had. A gentleman started talking about the failure that data warehouse was and that no one wanted to build one. He said that talk about data warehouse was forbidden and that a mention of data warehousing in IT circles was a case for being ridiculed. How did this happen? Because none of that is true. Here's how it happened in many places. The marketing organization found that it needed enterprise data in order to see what was going on in the corporation. The corporation had a bunch of applications, but no enterprise data. The marketing organization discovered data warehouse and thought that was a good idea. The IT department was called in but had no expertise, so a consulting firm or a vendor was brought in to build the data warehouse. The consulting firm or the vendor knew some buzzwords, but had no real understanding of what a data warehouse was. But IT had done work with the consulting firm or vendor before. IT felt that the consultant just had to know what she was doing. The consulting firm built something for the client, but it wasn't a data warehouse. When the project failed, data warehouse got the blame. The IT department could say, "We tried data warehousing, but it doesn't work." The truth is that the organization never built a data warehouse. Inevitably, the missing ingredient was the integration of the application data into an enterprise format. Integration of application data requires hard work, thinking, and managing tedium. All the things vendors and consulting firms hate. So the consulting firms just decided to ignore the need for integration and build something that remotely resembled a data warehouse. And a data warehouse without integration, integrity of data, is not a data warehouse. I don't know what it is, but I know it is not a data warehouse. Integration of data is the essence of data warehousing. Yet data warehousing gets to be blamed when consultants and vendors ignore it. The problem is that consultants don't know what a data warehouse is, and IT management is not sophisticated enough to know the difference. End quote. For those of you who do not know, we have been having this discussion since the early 90s. Indeed, one of the key predecessors of the IBM information warehouse was under development in the late 1980s in Toronto. It was called the Query Business Information System, also known as QBIS. In the early 90s, it was very expensive to get data out of large operational systems and into DB2, which is what IBM was pushing in the early 90s. The ETL systems were written in COBOL and the storage for the working files was on tapes. So when it came to data integration, as Bill is talking about, it was expensive. This expense made the data warehouse harder to get budgets for because the return on investment was considered so risky. The proposal to the business was that if business users could answer their own questions, then you would make more profit in the company. But since business users could not ask questions for themselves, there was no track record that the data warehouse would generate the return on investment that was proposed. Meanwhile, automating existing business processes to reduce the cost of those processes gave a very well understood return on investment. So in the early 90s, it was all but impossible to sell data warehousing. I failed in sale after sale. Teradata got some of the sales I tried to make. IRI Express got other sales I tried to make. Most of these sales and projects that I lost to other vendors also went very poorly and did not return their promised return on investment. In the 1992 until 1996 period, I lost so many deals it was heartbreaking. I finally had my breakthrough in 1997. I sold more than $10 million worth of deals in 1997. Unfortunately, one of them was canceled due to internal issues in the customer. Another one went poorly because I was excluded from the project as part of the politics of Hitachi Data Systems. In 1998, I sold the Telstra Telco Corporate Data Warehouse project, another project that went poorly because of the politics of PricewaterhouseCoopers. By the time I got to Arden in early 1999, I had a new idea for making sales forming in my mind. That new idea was this. By early 1999, in Australia, the IT landscape was awash with failed data warehousing projects. So, I hit on the idea that I would stop wasting my time trying to sell new projects to new customers who were doing data warehousing for the first time. I hit on the idea that I would only engage in serious sales cycles with large companies who had the following profile.
1,
They had tried twice to implement a data warehouse.
2,
They had spent more than 2 years trying to implement a data warehouse. 3. They had spent at least 1 million Australian dollars failing to implement their data warehouse. You may not believe this, but when I looked hard, I found more than 20 companies in Australia that fit that profile. I went and talked to all of them in my new position as the professional services manager of the largest data warehouse development team in Australia at Ardent. This included the team from the company that sold Bill's software in Australia. The sales pitch was kept simple. I told our prospects the following things.
1,
We are the best people in the country at data warehousing.
2,
If you hire my team, I will personally guarantee a return on your investment as long as you take my advice. In the cases where I could not personally guarantee the return on investment, I told the client that I could not guarantee the return on investment. In those cases, I told the client my personal level of confidence in our likelihood of getting the return on investment. My prospects were shocked to have a salesman give an honest appraisal of the likely return on investment given his experience. 3. I told my prospects that we were easily the most expensive people in the country on an hourly basis and just as easily the cheapest people in the country when measured based on return on investment. I went into these meetings so confident that we had a very compelling sales pitch. Guess what? We won a lot of those deals. In 1999, I did 130% of my quota. We also kicked IBM and the tool they were selling called ETI out of Telstra, which was our telco, and out of Qantas, which was our airline. Those were the only 2 sites IBM had for the ETI tool they were selling. At the same time, Informatica was only able to sell 2 licenses, and the 2 licenses they sold were to my prior 2 employers, Hitachi and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Those 2 companies bought those 2 licenses because they did not want me around their customers. So, effectively, by the time Informix bought Ardent, in Australia DataStage was the dominant ETL software with 50 installed accounts. And I was one of the great sales team that helped make DataStage so successful in Australia. So it would be reasonable for you to wonder,
1,
why were there so many failing projects in Australia and around the world?
2,
Why were we successful so often? Firstly, let us deal with why so many data warehouse projects failed back in those years. This is useful because they are failing for the same reasons now. In most companies, when you try and do something you have never done before in the IT world, you give that job to your own internal IT department on the basis that they will find out how to do the job themselves and not have to send money to expensive consultants. These internal IT people then read some books or today read some blog posts and watch some videos and then launch into the project with about 5% of the knowledge required to do it. These data warehouses built by internal IT people almost always fail for the very reason they have no idea what they are doing. So the next step is to hire one individual consultant who has some relevant experience who can implement the data warehouse and train the internal IT people how to support it. That is the role I played when I started my first company in 1994. This sort of project still fails about 80% of the time because that one external consultant usually lies about his experience, and since the internal IT people do not know how to spot those lies, they hire the man, and the project fails. After all that, then the company might just hire external consultants that know what they are doing and have a track record to prove it. But they won't hire such consultants up front because they can't justify the expense over and above the first 2 methods. Pretty much the first 2 methods have to fail before a large company will hire expensive consultants to do the job properly. That is how it was in Australia. That is how it is in most of the Western world. It is certainly how it is in most of the English-speaking world. If the internal IT people say they can build a data warehouse, then the business cannot hire external consultants until after the internal IT people fail. Usually they have to fail twice before the business will win the argument with the chief financial officer to spend the big money to hire the best people. All during this process, the vendors of hardware and software get paid regardless of the success or failure of the project. They push the business to buy the cheapest implementation methods so more money is left in the budget to buy their products. The vendors have a financial motive to lie and to present shortcuts that will get their products sold. I remember in the mid-1990s, companies started selling the 90-day data warehouse. At that time, this was completely ridiculous, but a lot of companies bought it. Indeed, my first ETL software was actually called the Instant Data Warehouse because it was so much faster than prior efforts. But instant it was not. That's marketing. You have to do it. The key problem in the 90s is the same key problem companies face today. What is the likely return on investment for this thing called a data warehouse? What is the probability we will get that return on investment? Because the probability of getting the return on investment is variable, and then the actual return on investment is variable. And because the landscape is littered with failed projects, it is more than reasonable for the chief financial officers of these companies to take the position they will release only a small budget for a pilot project and that the pilot project has to prove the return on investment before the whole budget for the project is released. It is also more than reasonable that the chief financial officer will insist that the project be done as economically as possible with a view that if the return on investment is achieved, then the project budget can be later increased for version 2.0. The only problem is that if you build your data warehouse on the cheap, they are very expensive to redo or extend to do properly. So all this has led to the recipe that early iterations of data warehouses either fail entirely and do not even make it to production. Or what is delivered to production in the 1.0 version is so bad that it dies a death of non-use, and everyone talks about how data warehousing does not work. Meanwhile, for those of us who have done data warehousing properly, our customers make lots of new profit in a sustainable fashion, avoiding the mistake of cost-cutting for near-term profit that harms long-term growth. Over the years, people like Bill, Ralph, myself, and many others wrote papers on the issues that cause failure in data warehousing projects. Eventually, I decided to turn that around, and I did a series of blog posts about how to guarantee success of data warehousing projects. In my own opinion, one of the great shames of our industry segment is that I was woke canceled in 2010 just as Sean Kelly and I were making a lot of headway in lowering the cost of data warehousing and increasing the reliability of the return on investment. In this video shot in 2010, you can see Sean Kelly and Brian Ganley talking about our 2009 delivery of our new version of our telco data warehouse. We were able to deliver the whole data warehouse for under £400,000 in services start to finish. We charged €100,000 for our data models. We charged £300,000 for our consulting services. We even gave Carphone Warehouse what we called a variable capped price offer. Our original proposal was for £500,000 as a fixed price. However, we said that we would charge a daily rate, and if we came in under the budget, they kept the money. We said that if we came in over the budget, we would eat any overrun. In the end, we came in £150,000 under our original budget. They were so pleased with this that they kept me on to do related work that was planned to go to another vendor. £100,000 of our revenue from that project came from work that we did not bid on. We gave them my ETL software for free because they were an Informatica account and had to go live on Informatica. The project from day one arrival to in production was 8 months. I arrived early September 2008 and we went live on the Easter weekend, 2009. We mapped the billing system, their customer relationship management system, and their network management system. We took all the fields from all these 3 systems and put them into the dimensional data warehouse on an Netetsa machine. All the ETL was done in SQL on the Netetsa machine. Informatica was pretty much just a scheduler of SQL statements in the end. At that time, 2009, delivering such a comprehensive data warehouse for under £300,000 in services was unheard of. This was exactly why we were hired to deliver the SkyTalk data warehouse right afterwards. Having delivered both the Carphone Warehouse and SkyTalk data warehouse in consecutive years in partnership with Netetsa, we were talking to all the big telcos in Europe in 2010. Then I Was Woke canceled in late 2010. Our industry did itself the disservice of ignoring the massive improvements Sean Kelly and I had been able to make. Our industry segment then continued of projects that crashed and burned and failed to deliver the promised return on investment. And as Bill notes, this is now reflected in the common perception that data warehousing does not work. And as Bill notes, much of what has been done is not data warehousing, but data warehousing got the blame in the end. As I mentioned above, people wrote a lot of articles about why these projects fail. 10 years ago, I decided to write a suite of blog posts to talk about how to make these projects successful. You can listen to these blog posts on the videos below. Sadly, the young men in our industry segment chose not to listen to these blog posts, and they kept delivering projects that failed. Now they have to live with that reputation for business failure for the rest of their lives. Today I can go out onto the internet and ask so-called data warehousing experts the following question. How much would you charge to build a complete data warehouse for a telephone company with 4 million subscribers? The answer I would get is this. Well, it depends. I would have to closely analyze all the data that you want to put into the data warehouse and then give you an estimate. But if I run over the estimate, you will have to pay me extra. And you can be pretty sure that the starting point is around $600,000 and that the time frame is around 1 year. My answer will be, I will charge you 100,000 euros as a fixed price. For that price, I can guarantee that you will get a very large return on your investment. I guarantee that the project will be done in less than 6 months. I guarantee that fee will get you into production with 2 months of production support. Then if you want to buy your ongoing production support from me after 2 months, that will be extra. Which of those two offers sounds like the man making it knows what he is doing? I was making fixed price data warehousing offers as early as 1996. How could I make fixed price offers for a style of project that so commonly fails? Because I had my own ETL software. That's how. And after I went to work for Sean Kelly in 2001, we had our own data models called the Sybase Industry Warehouse Studio Data Models. If you talk to so-called data experts today about how they do projects, they still start with a blank piece of paper for the data model. Having a suite of data models to start with is still not standard today, and we had it as a standard in Sybase 25 years ago. This is one more reason why our industry segment is a joke. If I wanted to, I could go through a very long list of failed projects where the company selecting the vendor to implement the data warehouse made such poor decisions it was just crazy. Please allow me to give you just 3 examples. The best example I have of a major global company buying a data warehouse deal they should never have bought was Vodafone in Ghana in 2011. In 2011, Vodafone was one of the world's leading mobile phone companies. Vodafone Ghana spent $2 million over a year with a vendor on a data warehousing project that was a complete failure. When the vendor was removed and I went over their project deliverables, there was not a single thing that they had produced that was worth keeping. Not one document of any value was created out of that $1 million spent. The Chief Information Officer gave me a copy of the tender response and asked me to please review it and tell me if there were any obvious signs that the vendor did not know what they were doing. Right in front of him, I opened the tender document to the project plan page and looked at it. Vodafone Ghana had 4 billing systems because of the history of the acquisitions of the company. Vodafone Ghana also bought the Telecom Ghana landline government telco. In the project plan, the task for ETL development was 8 weeks. I told him that 8 weeks in the project plan for the development of ETL for 4 telco billing systems demonstrates that the vendor had no clue what they were doing. I told him that even if I did that work with my software, the fastest possible time it could be completed in was 6 months, and the most likely possible time it would be completed in was 8 months. I told him that without needing to see the billing systems because I know what is inside telco billing systems. I told him that anyone who had any experience in telco data warehousing would know that the most likely time period for the writing of the ETL was 8 months, not 8 weeks. I told him that if his company had sent me the tender to review prior to purchase, then I would have told his company not to buy from this tender for free. This was because I would rather do the 2 minutes work for free than to have another failed data warehousing project giving me and my segment a bad name. In fact, I have often publicly said the following. If any company who is considering buying a data warehouse development project would like me to review their final selection and to provide them my opinion of their selection, then I would be happy to do that for free to do my bit to stop the snake oil salesman selling bad deals. However, large companies will not even take me up on that free offer. I can't do any more than make the free offer of reviewing data, warehousing proposals, and telling customers if they should not buy the offer, because it indicates lack of ability on behalf of the consultants making the proposal. Here is a second one that is all too common. The worst data warehouse purchase decision I have ever seen in my life was Telecom New Zealand buying a Teradata machine back in 1992. Telecom New Zealand used AS400s for their billing system because they were so small as a telco. The managing director of IBM New Zealand was on the board of Telecom New Zealand. Teradata had made an offer to Telecom New Zealand. This offer was unknown to me at the time. I came into my IBM office in Sydney one morning in early 1992. There was an email from the secretary of the IBM New Zealand managing director in my inbox. She told me that the managing director wanted to see me in his office later that day. My ticket from Sydney to Wellington could be picked up at the airport. She had also faxed over copies of the technical specifications they could get for the Teradata machine being proposed. So, I went to the airport in a taxi. I picked up my ticket and I flew from Sydney to Wellington. Such short notice trips were not that uncommon for me across my career. I read the documentation provided on the way over. I was in the managing director's office by 6 o'clock that night. He asked me if the proposal would work. I said no. It can't work. I explained the reason was the Teradata interface cards were designed to connect to IBM mainframe computers. They were not designed to connect to AS400s. I explained that the technical documentation provided by Teradata meant that to transfer one day's worth of call data would take 36 hours. I explained that they had done their best to hide the slow transfer speeds of AS400s deep down in their technical specifications. But since I knew that connecting to AS400s was a problem, I knew to look for that information. I told him it did not matter how large the Teradata machine was because the number of interface cards was limited. He got his own people to verify what I was saying, and they were shocked that they missed it. I was only a second-year systems engineer at that time, so the managing director was pretty impressed. The next day, he went to the board meeting where the purchase decision would be made. As a board member, he said he had important information pertinent to the purchase decision, and he would like to present it. He asked his fellow board members if they were willing to listen to this information. The board voted no. They did not want to hear the opinion of the managing director of IBM New Zealand about a $5 million purchase. Please remember this was a government-owned institution, and this was taxpayer money being spent. At that time, Telecom New Zealand was not a private company. The money for the Teradata machine would be paid for with taxpayer money and call costs to New Zealanders via a monopoly. The refusal of the board to listen to the advice of the managing director of IBM New Zealand also had political implications for the government. The Teradata machine was duly delivered and did not work. Teradata convinced Telecom New Zealand that they needed to upgrade the machine and double its size to get it to work. Telecom New Zealand bought that upgrade too. Finally, a year later, Telecom New Zealand asked IBM for a proposal to replace the Teradata machine and project with a small IBM mainframe running DB2. I went over and worked on the proposal in mid-1993. When the proposal was presented, Telecom New Zealand said they would buy the proposal if IBM bought back the Teradata machine at cost so that they could offload the failed machine. The reason they wanted to do this was to avoid any political fallout if the failed purchase decision ever came out. They wanted the purchase decision of the Teradata machine to be swept under the rug, so to speak. Of course, the IBM managing director reminded Telecom New Zealand that they had refused to even listen to him a year earlier. He said he would not buy the Teradata machine for even $1, let alone $10 million. In the end, the purchase decision and the waste of $10 million came out, and it was quite the political scandal. A couple of years later, the Teradata salesman for that deal was in Sydney. I invited him to lunch just to meet him and say hello. I asked him if he knew the machine he was selling to Telecom New Zealand would never work. He said that of course he did. I asked him why he sold a 5 million US dollar machine when he knew it would not work. He laughed and simply said,
Quote,
"Peter, I got my commission." End quote. This is the attitude of most salesmen in most technology companies. As long as they get their commission, what happens on the deal is none of their concern. In late 1993, the fifth largest bank in Australia, called St. George Bank, was considering buying a Teradata machine. I got the managing director of IBM New Zealand to ask the Chief Information Officer of Telecom New Zealand if he would please take a call from the Chief Information Officer of St. George Bank. I wanted the Chief Information Officer of Telecom New Zealand to please tell the Chief Information Officer of St. George Bank what had happened on that project. The Chief Information Officer of Telecom New Zealand said no. He would not take the call. He said that the official position of Telecom New Zealand is that they would not provide any information about such a badly failed project to anyone for any reason. The St. George Bank duly purchased the Teradata machine only to go through the very expensive upgrades to try and get it to work. 3 years later, in 1996, I did a call on the manager responsible for the Teradata project at St. George Bank. He was unhappy with how the project had gone. I reminded him that I was the IBM employee who tried to sell them our DB2 solution, and they chose Teradata over my proposal. He actually said to me, and I quote, "But your proposal did not store the detailed banking transactions, so we could not buy it." I replied, "That is not true. We had all the detailed banking transactions in our prototype, and everyone in the evaluation team knows that." He looked stunned. He said he had been told our proposal did not support detailed transactions and that we only had summary data in our prototype. I reminded him I wrote the code, and I put the detailed transactions into the data warehouse myself. All 3 million rows of them at the time. I told him that whoever told him that the IBM proposal did not contain the detailed transactions lied to him. He thanked me for telling him this. He later emailed me and told me that he had spoken to people who were on the evaluation team, and they all confirmed what I had said. He told me that he had gone back and dug up the Teradata presentation for the sales pitch, and on that presentation it said that the IBM proposal did not contain the detailed level transactions. I told him this was situation normal for Teradata. So he invited me back out for a second meeting to discuss whether I could help the bank migrate to a better solution. At that time, I was independent, and I introduced an old friend of mine who now worked at Sun to this manager and said that Sun and Oracle would be a good fit. A little while later, I started working at Hitachi, where we were selling Sequent hardware, and I went back and said that now I represent Hitachi, we would also be interested in presenting Sequent versus Sun, with Oracle still being the database. Both Sun and Sequent gave St. George Bank rough estimates of the costs to migrate the now Teradata data warehouse to their hardware. In the end, St. George Bank took the position of it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. But here was another clear case where a vendor lied on a proposal presentation, and yet the company still bought the product they were selling. When you are willing to buy from a salesman you know is lying to you, then you can hardly complain when the project goes poorly. I will add this comment here. The official policy of IBM was that no IBM employee was ever to disparage any competitor. As part of our training, we were taught that if we ever criticized a competitor in any way, shape, or form, we would lose our job. There would be no discussion. If we were found guilty by an internal HR investigation that we had criticized a competitor, we would be fired. During this sales process to St. George Bank, I took the evaluation team to my customer, the Mutual Life Company. The Mutual Life Company had evaluated Teradata 2 years prior when making the decision to buy the system I was working on. They decided against Teradata. The reason was that they were offered a proposal of a Teradata machine that was being sold as new and at new pricing. The Mutual Life Company gave us the serial number of the Teradata machine. The machine had previously been installed in the data center of an IBM customer. In IBM, we routinely took photographs of the serial numbers of competitive machines in our customers' data centers. This was because it was so common for them to be removed and then sold as new to unsuspecting buyers. When we were given the serial number of the proposed Teradata machine, we found it listed as having been installed at one of our customers. We gave copies of those photographs to the Mutual Life Company. This all had to go through our IBM legal department to make sure no rules were broken. The mutual life company had the Teradata salesman come in, and he was asked to please explain these photographs. The salesman pretended that he did not know the history of the machine, thereby compounding the lie. The mutual life company had a standing policy that it did not buy products or services from any company where the salesman could be proven to have lied during the sales process. My customer had gotten permission from his legal department to explain all this to the people from St. George Bank evaluating the purchase of the Teradata machine. I did not say any of this as it was nothing to do with me or IBM. Unfortunately, one of those evaluators from St. George Bank made the false allegation to the IBM salesman for the bank that I had made those comments. I then had to defend myself in an internal inquiry from IBM Human Resources from these false allegations. This is the sort of thing that was going on more than 30 years ago. It has only gotten worse. The snake oil salesmen have been getting away with lying because the customers they lie to are not willing to tell other prospects of the snake oil salesman that the snake oil salesman is lying. Where men are honest men of honor and integrity and they warn their peers that they are considering buying something from a snake oil salesman. Even the people they are trying to help will cause problems for the honest men of honor and integrity by lying about them. For my entire life in marketing in the computing industry, people have provided more support for the snake oil salesmen, the liars and the grifters, than they have for the honest men of honor and integrity like me. The state of our industry reflects this more than 30 years of support for the snake oil salesman. The single most important action men in our industry segment could take to improve the reputation of the men in it is to support the honest men of honor and integrity in our industry segment like Bill Inman and myself. The second most important action men in our industry segment could take to improve the reputation of the men in it is to name and shame the snake oil salesman in our industry segment. I am quite happy to do that because my income stream is no longer able to be affected by lies told by liars. I've been getting lied about in public since 2010, so my income earning ability was destroyed back then. I have since been able to create a small income stream that is not able to be destroyed by liars lying about me. It would be nice if other men hired me to increase that income stream since I am now 62 years old and in debt because I am an honest man of honor and integrity. Sadly, I don't think men in my industry segment will ever support the few honest men of honor and integrity there are in our industry. I sincerely hope I am wrong on that point, but I don't think so. In any case, moving forward, while I have been woke cancelled, I have not been idle. I have invented the future of data warehousing. We now have ETL development times in excess of 12,000 fields mapped from source to target in one 220-hour work month. We now have the ability to have one suite of ETL for multiple customers of the same large operational system in the cloud. This has brought down the costs of data warehouse development more than 80% over what it was when we did Carphone Warehouse in 2009. We even have a mechanism for having just one suite of ETL without any customer data cohabiting with any other customer data in the one physical table. Of course, if the customers will allow their data to cohabit in the same table and to implement security in views, then the cost of that implementation is lower because there is only one set of tables for end customers. If the customers insist on no cohabitation of data inside the same table, then you need n sets of tables and indexes for the end customers, which takes time and costs money to manage. Even so, having n sets of tables for end customers is far cheaper than having n copies of the ETL system to maintain. Now that I am 62 and I have the lovely opportunity to simply work from my nice apartment in Fiji, I am hopeful that those men who are smart enough to understand what I am talking about will pick up on these new ideas and adopt them for their businesses. Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. In the end, if the next generation of the smartest data warehouse architects do not pick up on these ideas I have put out into the public for data warehousing done properly, our industry segment will have the same bad reputation in 2050 as it has now. I think that would be a shame given that the projects I and many others implemented delivered so much value to our customers. Today it is really up to those smart young men coming through to decide for themselves if they will take my advice and adopt my ideas to make their data warehousing companies more successful. We will see what they do. And with that, I hope you found this blog post interesting and informative. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate that. Best regards, Esther, Peter's AI assistant.